Okay, so found another one. Just trying to be a little bit more active today on here. This was originally shared by. Okay, there's the microphone. Sorry about that. This was originally shared by Dystopia Daily, but it was originally Capitalism Breeds Poverty. That's who they shared it from. Um, so Mike Johnson said Congress needs stock trading to quote support their families, which I mean I agree that's a completely ludicrous statement coming from a politician. Now I'm not criticizing stock market per se. I would definitely criticize their particular iteration of the quote stock market. Their particular economic system is obviously completely fraudulent, but that doesn't mean that trading isn't happening. That doesn't mean that the commodities and the people and that their wealth uh, is fraudulent. Just mostly the money, the main medium there, which is very important and has a lot of implications. But yeah, ludicrous statement coming from a politician. But then of course, the socialists sounds like minimum wage should be set at 174K a year. Now, what's funny about this is, man, just probably just not even within the last year was the last time I've done it. But I used to always like throw out ludicrous numbers like this when arguing with socialists to try to show them how silly it is, like, and how bad of an economic policy minimum wage is in general. Because I would say criticize them and saying, well, why are you guys only asking for $15? Like, that's honestly chump change, and it is. Like, it is. Especially if you're a socialist, and it's like you're looking at um, these corporations, and you're saying about all these, and then you go out there and they're demanding a $15 minimum wage an hour. It's like that's not a lot of money, dude. But so I'd say, well, why are you settling for so little? Why not 50? Why not 500? Why not $500,000 an hour minimum wage? And the point of it is to showcase that the higher the state rises, the higher the state sets the price floor, the less people can afford to offer jobs. Um, so the more you're limiting opportunity, right? So eventually, we're all going to be working for these six corporations that they claim to hate because nobody else can afford it. And on top of that, if given such a ridiculous economic system, I don't think anybody would be that insane to actually try to do that. Except, I mean, maybe there would. I guess we have examples of hyperinflation and things, but um, the state's going to end up saving those exact corporations that you claim to hate when this joke of a system actually inevitably eats itself, crumbles. You know, Prices of commodities are going to rise. Like, they don't understand how any of this works. Like, the only way that you could think this through seriously and come out still thinking it's a good idea is that you don't have any idea what you're talking about. Like, if there's really no, you have to be missing some crucial elements, I would say. Um, because even like a so-called moderate, you talk to them and they'll be like, okay, well, no, I think if you threw out a $200,000, they're saying a year. I say an hour because it really doesn't matter. The principle here is that the state is setting prices. The state is dictating prices, which does not have the right to do. And when you think about what that means, how could the state couldn't possibly have the right to dictate prices? To say that they do just makes you an authoritarian socialist, right? You have to be a totalitarian socialist. You can't just go. That's the part that the minarchists don't see, and that's the part also that the moderates and whatever else you want to call them don't see, is that you can't, like, as soon as you accept any so-called minimum wage law, you basically have stepped over into the camp of the totalitarian socialist. Because even though you don't say a $200,000 a year, or you don't say that the state should completely nationalize everything, you've accepted the same fundamental premise. Because if the state can set a $15 price floor on labor, why can't it set a $200,000 an hour price floor on labor? Like, it does. Like, the number after the fact does not matter. They think it does because they try to bicker and argue about what's the best type of government to basically control everybody. And in their mind, it's to keep the peace. Even the socialists, it's more or less something like that, where it's to distribute justice fairly. Maybe it would be more of a socialist kind of way of looking at it, as opposed to the so-called right wingers who like keep the peace, protect our property, and all that stuff that the state necessarily violates by its very existence. But they don't see that part. But Yeah, so I've used this for years, and it's funny that they are basically starting to, like, they think that this is a good argument, and it's the only way that you could possibly think this is if you just really don't understand what is happening when you're talking about what is happening in production and trade and how property comes to be, how property changes hands. They understand one aspect of how property, well, they know that theft is a way that property changes hands. I was going to say that they understand one way, but they really don't, because they perceive profit itself as theft, and that's just insanity, right? Or they might say that profit, if you employ somebody, if you pay somebody to do something and don't, nobody would ever pay somebody to do something and then give them all of the return of the benefit, right? Nobody would do that. There's no point in that. You would just either do it yourself, or you wouldn't do it, or the other person would somehow come to what they needed in some other means, because you guys obviously aren't going to trade, because if I'm looking at something and it's going to cost me the same to me to get it, I'm probably not going to do it. Like if I make that trade, somewhere in my mind I valued what I'm getting more than what I'm giving up, right? So um, but they view profit as theft, which just totally screws up their whole perspective of the world. And also, they don't seem to have a firm grasp of like how property actually comes to be and what that means for somebody to produce something out of nature, right? And then what it what the implications of freedom would mean in regards to that. So they think they do, of course. I mean, everybody thinks they do, but I would say that it's really easy to walk through, like starting at a Crusoe example, walk through how property and houses and even real estate, though, in some points the communists are correct in criticizing, spurious claims to property where no actual labor or production or development has taken place, and the state maintains those claims too. And a lot of that is what we was originally basically the so-called capitalist system, right? And sure, a lot of that continues, and people do still kind of take that claim of property as legitimate. Even a lot of so-called right-wing libertarians and stuff, but Rothbard even criticized that view himself, that there's no development taking place, so you can't really claim that as your property just by walking around and fencing it off and saying it's mine forever. That's not Lockean concept of property, right? So, yeah, just interesting that they're thinking that this is a good idea. I guess I've made my point on this one. Maybe not. Who knows? Definitely just rambling on a somewhat. No, it's actually cleared up a little bit. A little bit rainy earlier today, but alrighty, yeah. Minimum wage law is a bad idea because you are already accepting the notion that our political overlords have the right to impose on everybody's transactions. You are circumventing even the laborer's right to negotiate. And the socialist would say, well, what are you talking about? And it doesn't matter because we're doing them a favor. We're going to negotiate for more. And it's the principle of the matter is what counts, because when you forsake that principle, you open the floodgate to everything else, like I said. And I do this, I argue this with Republicans too, that they don't understand that when you accept the premise that the state has the right to control human migration, then you have opened up the floodgate to any other economic control. I mean, that is the first step, and essentially the primary aspect of what constitutes this concept of ownership is the right to exclude other people, right? So to accept the state as having that right, you have already accepted the concept that the state could have the right, and basically does have the right. It just has chosen not to enact it through whatever, um, like political means they've chosen not to. Procedural. What am I looking for here? Technicality. That they have not chosen to nationalize all industry, because this the point of what I'm saying is that you have accepted that the state has the right to control human migration. That is basically the first step of ownership, the primary claim of ownership. So at that point, just because they haven't voted for nationalizing, you would have to naturally accept that the state could have the right to nationalize all industry. And at that point, your own argument about if you don't like it, leave, gets turned right around on you. Now, they'll say that it's, that's unconstitutional. And again, that was my point about it's a technicality. Like, what if, I mean, they believe in the, democratic republican system, the liberal democracy. I mean, Republicans are so funny. They run around talking trash about liberals, but it's like, you are the liberal Democrats, dude. Like, you are the classical liberals. At least you used to be. Now you're definitely way more like the National Socialists. Not the National Socialists. Just you're definitely a national socialist. Trump is definitely a national socialist. But you know, so it does make sense now that they criticize liberals because yeah, you guys are not liberals. You have forsaken all of what you have claimed as your heritage over the last century, um, definitely. So, but yeah, same exact logic, just from a different perspective. But yeah, very. It's just crazy how these guys don't see, especially now when the socialists are criticizing Trump's socialism, not necessarily in this point post, but um, they're criticizing his tariffs and they're criticizing his other collectivist aspects of his authoritarian collectivist viewpoints, and it's like you guys really need to look in the mirror because you accept the same underlying premise. The only thing that you are arguing about is you don't like what the master is doing. Like all of your economic outlook is the same exact thing as Donald Trump. It really is. These socialists. I mean, and it's just fundamentally that is like they share the same collectivist belief that the state has the right to control the economy. Just generally basic, very vague statement, but I mean, really, that's what it is, and all of the implications that come with that. So just because you don't like that the state has set a too low of a price floor, I mean, because that thing about that too, that's basically what the state is doing with commodities, with the tariffs, is attempting to set a price floor on foreign commodities, which will then, of course, like think of it this way: if something sells for 100 and the foreign is $1 less or something, and then they raise the tariff 20% on the foreigns, well, now that's 19% wiggle room or whatever, 20% that the um, domestic producer has to raise his price and not really get much of a peep out of the economy. And that's generally what tends to happen is that, well, I have room to raise my price now. So why wouldn't they? I mean, honestly, why wouldn't they? I don't necessarily you can't quote fault the market because it's this abstraction. It's just that's what people do. They're going to follow the, okay, well, I can afford to make a little bit more money. Um, and so prices are going to naturally rise overall. Okay, end rant. Yep, socialists don't understand what they're talking about.